The longest State of the Union speech ever is over. We've confirmed that, right? Yeah, we've confirmed that. But the DHS shutdown continues. A key voice in spending negotiations on Capitol Hill, Alabama Senator Britt joins us with a status check. Iran's foreign minister tells India today war with America could engulf the Middle East, a, quote, terrible scenario. Bill and Hillary Clinton soon to testify about the Epstein files. One of the questioners, New Mexico Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, and she joins us. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Longest ever. Already diced up and algorithmically distributed. President Trump's State of the Union address, light on new ideas, very heavy on genuine American heroes, and the halo effect Trump hoped to bask in. The address also took time to taunt and hector. Republicans loved it. Democrats boycotted or sat mostly in stony, defiant silence. Weijia Jiang from the White House will sum up the rest. Alabama Republican Senator Britt, who you might remember, delivered the GOP response to President Biden in 2024 and then endured a not-so-gentle satirical takedown from Saturday Night Live, but lived to tell about it, will join us for reaction to the president's speech, and we also hope to learn from her if there's any there to talks to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Britt is quickly becoming a key negotiator on hard spending disputes, and this most certainly is one. Russia's invasion of Ukraine turned 4 years old yesterday, a miserable slaughterhouse of an anniversary. Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky had a phone call today, and Zelensky announced afterward the next stage of peace talks will involve him and Russian President Vladimir Putin and take place next month. Zelensky importantly said Trump, quote, supports this sequence of events. We will run this news information by a very interested party. Latvia's foreign minister. Latvia has, in some of the strongest terms possible, condemned Russia's invasion and called for maximum Western pressure to end the war and, importantly, punish Russia for many alleged war crimes. We will also show you parts of an interview today conducted by India Today, that's TV in India, with Iran's foreign minister. It captures the regime's attitude about future talks with the U.S. and prospects of a U.S. military attack. Also tonight, Larry Summers steps down at Harvard, Bill Gates apologizes, and Bill and Hillary Clinton prepare to testify. All of this fallout from the Epstein files. And there's another angle. Allegations against Trump that might have been suppressed at the Department of Justice. We will dig into all of this with Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, a New Mexico Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, which is the body on Capitol Hill most aggressive on all matters Epstein. And as if that is not enough, we have more, I tell you. California Attorney General Rob Bonta on immigration, voter identification, and a proposed billionaire's tax in California. We start with a speech that swallowed up primetime and our Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weij.
Major, a speech that swallowed up primetime perhaps by design, because we know how closely the president monitors that very valuable chunk of time between 9 and 11, of which he took most of, to deliver a historic speech in its length that really spelled out the case for patriotism. If you look back, that was the big theme of the night, and he used that to question whether Democrats have it during many different parts of the speech, and of course during probably one of the most memorable, he even put them on the spot by asking people to stand if they believe that the first duty of members of Congress was to protect American citizens over illegal immigrants. And so that is just one of many ways that this White House is using last night's speech to continue to build, because as you already mentioned, these speeches these days, not only in the Trump administration, but even in the Biden administration, are written to be bite-sized, to include portions that they can clip and post all over social media because they know that is where they are going to get even more of a reach. So, you know, I don't know about your phone, but mine is just filled with different clips from both sides trying to highlight what they want to, the good and the bad, in their view, from last night. And it is customary, of course, for the president to travel after the State of the Union. President Trump will be going to Corpus Christi, Texas on Friday to try to build momentum after last night.
What is the White House saying, Weege, about the assessment that there wasn't much either new or very few legislative calls to action, which are typical component parts of a traditional State of the Union?
Well, they would disagree with that, Major, because the president claims he laid out a new economic vision, which did include some calls for legislative action, but not many, 3 in total, one including the SAVE Act, which, of course, is to tighten voter registration laws. There was at least one policy proposal that was meant to offer more economic stability to Americans by setting up a new universal savings program for workers who currently do not have access to a 401k retirement savings program. The president wants to match $1,000 a year for those workers. But to your question, Major, this White House is celebrating today because, you know, they really view this as a chance for the president to tout his accomplishments already, in addition to looking ahead. So you're right in that there isn't a lot of substance there, but that is not necessarily their focus either, even though, as I mentioned, they would argue that he laid out his new economic plan, which we did not see a lot of details about, Major.
Weijia Jiang, North Lawn of the White House, thank you so very much. Alabama Republican Senator Katie Britt joins me now from Capitol Hill. Senator, great to have you with us. One of the things, and I've covered many State of the Union addresses, and one of the things they hope to achieve is kind of a before and after effect. Before their speech, there was one political atmosphere. After the speech, there is another. Do you think President Trump had a before and after moment after last night's speech?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that this was the best State of the Union that we have seen in modern history. The reason I say that is President Trump did an outstanding job of reminding Americans where we were over the last 4 years in the Biden administration. Borders that had illegal immigrants flowing over, unsafe streets, costs that were out of reach, making the American dream further and further away for so many people who had hoped to achieve it, and obviously complete and total chaos abroad. President Trump succinctly came back and said, let me remind you where we are and let me remind you where we are now. He talked about the things he has done, closing our border, no new encounters people let into our border over the last 9 months. He talked about crime being at 125% decrease, or 125 years low when it came to murder rates and crime in large cities going down. He talked about making good on the promises he put in front of the American people, Major, and he made his case convincingly. In addition to all of those things and talking about the things that happened in the working families tax cut that ultimately people are seeing the effects of right now, President Trump also revitalized a spirit of America and patriotism that people have been longing for. People want to see a leader that is excited about the country they lead and that believes that its best days are ahead and that are committed to doing everything possible to achieving that. That's what they saw in the president. And in addition to all of that, I think we had a moment as Americans to remember the sacrifice of our servicemen and women. And so seeing each of these people, whether it's first responders or men and women in uniform, from the Coast Guard to those who have done the most complex missions, Americans got a chance to say thank you alongside the President of the United States and to realize all that they put on the line for the freedoms in the country that we love. So I think that there is a hopeful spirit, and I think there is also an optimism that we finally have a leader that campaigns on something on the campaign trail and then makes good on it. And he certainly laid that out in stark contrast to what we saw in the Biden administration.
Senator, with your permission, let's go from rhetoric to legislative reality. You are the Appropriations Subcommittee Chair of Homeland Security, which means you are central to whatever dialogue is going on, visibly or invisibly, to resolve the standoff over DHS funding. What can you tell us about the state and nature of those conversations?
Yeah, so we re-engaged actually today, obviously allowing the president to have last night and to make the case in front of the American people. You saw what you saw with regards to the member of the Coast Guard that saved over 100 little girls and people in the midst of a flood. We've seen obviously everything from HSI to TSA to anything in between that falls in Homeland Security and how important that is. We had that front and center last night. I have re-engaged in conversations today with my Democratic colleagues, and I am hopeful we can find a pathway forward. Look, I think what people have to remember here, Major, is that this encompasses so many things that are important to Americans right now. Obviously at TSA, but also FEMA. And so we're talking about how does this work? We're looking at the disaster relief fund being depleted, getting that money out the door and knowing that Americans need that moving forward. It's important that we keep the Department of Homeland Security funded and keep that funded together. And I think in conversations that have begun again, I'm hopeful we'll find a pathway forward. Look, everybody knows that we need to reach a result because those paychecks will stop on March 5th.
Is the White House open to legislative reforms to the day-to-day procedures of immigration, customs, and enforcement on interior enforcement, which seems to be the big ask from Senate Democrats?
Yeah, I think, well, look, if you're looking at how we actually do business, I think you've seen the president on down bring the temperature of the country down. And I appreciate his leadership on that, reaching out to the governor, reaching out to the mayor. Then we saw the secretary deploying the body cameras. And we've seen Tom Coleman come in and really make sure that we are drawing down the numbers of people where we have that cooperation. Look, this is an appropriations bill. So this is funding between now and September. This is not a legislative bill, but there are definitely things that we can do to make sure that we are, yes, abiding by the law, yes, enforcing the law, but we know that the way you do it matters, and we want to do that the right way. So we are certainly open to doing those things, Major. We have to remember we're in a funding element, but I think you've seen the administration operate in good faith. The American people have seen the administration operate in good faith. So I'm hopeful that we can find a pathway forward, and I think that that's what's best for America, for sure.
Senator, let me paraphrase Democrats who've been on my program. They say the following.
Okay.
This is not a typical appropriations negotiation. Alex Preddy is dead. Renee Good is dead. We have to have things that are binding because their deaths cannot go unrecognized in terms of this moment to legislatively put some things on paper that change ICE procedures. How would you respond to that?
Major, the death of any American citizen is a tragedy, so let's start there. What I would say is over the countless lives that have been lost in the Biden administration, starting with Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungary and Rachel Moran and others, from the actual failed border policies of the previous administration, we continue to say this must stop. Democrats said it can't stop unless we have legislation. We proved with President Trump that we didn't need legislation, we needed a new president. What I am telling you now is that President Trump is committed to making sure that we abide by the law, enforce the law. We know the way you do it matters, and he's committed to doing it the right way. And I think that you will see that moving forward. Look, we're not going to walk away from enforcing the law. There are countless members of families out there who have lost loved ones to fentanyl overdoses or have lost loved ones to the unfortunate acts of illegal migrants that are here. And we take that serious. Look, the president campaigned on this and he won on this issue. He said, I am going to see you. I'm going to make our streets safe. I'm going to make our borders secure. And so I'll tell you, that's the answer right there in front of you. And we're going to make sure that we do it the right way. And so, Major, I know that there are a lot of conversations moving around, but at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the people who are working the TSA line get paid, the people who are working to get these FEMA grants out get paid, the people who are trying to help people who just went through the snowstorm get paid. And what Democrats know is that the people of CBP and ICE are going to continue to operate. So them dragging their feet, Major, does absolutely nothing because we are still operating in this space. So you cannot tell me that you are concerned about what they're doing, but yet not be at the table right now for solutions. So walking away is literally political theater. They feel like they have an issue. They're placating to their base instead of coming forward and trying to find solutions, trying to find some incremental or adjustments or changes that can be made. They know ICE and CBP are operating right now, and they also know the good work that those men and women do. Half of where we are right now has to do with sanctuary city policies. So if we're going to talk about legislative action, Major, then those things are going to be on the table. And I guarantee you that people do not want taxpayer dollars going to fund cities that do not cooperate with law enforcement. We know that streets would be safer if people would take a look and say, hey, when we have someone with an ICE detainer, we're going to let the federal government know so they can come pick them up. Not where we have to put additional men and women in the streets to go and find those people and bring them back. We've got to make sure we keep our law enforcement officers safe and we keep our community safe. And we do that through enforcement. We do that through cooperation. So if they want to do legislative fixes, there's going to be a whole lot more on the table. And I think the American people are with us on that.
You have laid that out quite clearly. Senator Katie Britt, Alabama Republican, key figure in all these conversations. Please come back when we have more to talk about. I appreciate it very much for your time.
Absolutely,
thank you.
Major. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We are following a developing story tonight. The Cuban government says its troops killed several people on board a Florida speedboat in what it says was Cuban territorial waters. Christian Benavides is tracking the latest on this story tonight from Miami Beach, Florida. What can you tell us?
Major, this is an incredibly sensitive situation. We know about the heightened tensions between the U.S. and Cuba ever since the operation in Venezuela. And I should preface mentioning this information by saying that the information is coming from the Interior Ministry of Cuba. And Cuba, of course, is a repressive communist regime, and there is no independent reporting that can come out of Cuba. And so this is what the government has said so far, that Cuba's Coast Guard killed 4 people on a speedboat as it entered Cuban waters, a speedboat that was registered in Florida. There were 10 people overall on board this speedboat. What the Cuban government has said is that border guard members approached the speedboat, asked for an ID, and at that moment, those who were on board the speedboat opened fire on the border guard members, and the border guard members returned fire on those who were on board the Florida speedboat. The big question at this point is who was on board the boat? Was it American citizens? Were they U.S. permanent residents? U.S. Congressman Carlos Jimenez has called for an independent probe into exactly what is it that took place. And all of this, of course, happening amid those heightened tensions between the two nations.
And a very strong economic noose around the neck of Cuba that is supported by the Trump administration, maybe to pursue regime change. We don't know about that, but we know the economic noose is tightening, very much so. Christian Benavides, thank you very much from Miami. Appreciate it. As the U.S. deploys aircraft and warships to the Middle East, President Trump used his State of the Union address to issue a warning to the leaders of Iran ahead of nuclear talks in Geneva tomorrow, while telling those who were there in Capitol Hill that Iran has already developed missiles that he said threaten Europe and some U.S. bases overseas. Listen.
After midnight hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons, yet they continue. My preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy. But one thing is certain, I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen.
Andrew Boyd joins me now. He is former chief of operations for the CIA Counterterrorism Mission Center. Andrew, where do you think we are in this? I keep asking members of Congress who appear on this program if it feels to them as if we are on the verge of war with Iran, and I get mixed answers.
Good evening, Major. We could be on the verge of war with Iran. I think during the State of the Union, the president made clear his administration is not going to allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. He made reference to the proxy groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Shia militias in Iraq. That's unacceptable, a missile threat. And then he did make reference to the thousands of protesters in Iran who were recently killed. So, some have been commenting that the president was not specific enough in the State of the Union address. But I think his administration wants some strategic ambiguity going into another round of diplomatic negotiations in Geneva tomorrow. But there is quite a bit of discussion, as you allude to in Congress, that if those negotiations fail, conflict may be imminent.
Andrew, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke to India TV and talked about negotiations that were going on in June and the memory Iran has of those. I want you to listen to that, please.
We were negotiating last June when Israel attacked us, and then the U.S. joined that attack. So that memory is still fresh for us. The wounds of that aggression is still alive in our minds. So we cannot forget that once we negotiating with the U.S. and then they decided to attack us. This time we are obviously more careful.
How do you parse that, Andrew?
I think the Iranian foreign minister is posturing himself en route to the next round of negotiations. The reality of the 12-day war and the U.S. involvement of it, it was a very specific target to degrade the capability of Iran to develop fissile material for nuclear weapons, and it was in large part successful. What happens tomorrow is critical, but the Iranians are posturing because reflecting back on what happened in June, they're signaling to the world that they may not trust the United States in negotiations, which I think ultimately is the wrong position for the Iranians to take.
I also want to play this soundbite from that same interview where he talks about what might happen if war begins. Listen.
It would be a devastating war. And since the Americans' bases are scattered in different places in the region, then unfortunately perhaps the whole region would be engaged and would be involved. So it is a terrible scenario. I don't even want to talk about that.
Andrew, I've got about 30 seconds. Sum that up for me.
Again, more posturing, obviously a threat, a coercive diplomacy threat going into a negotiation. Yes, the Iranians can cause a lot of mayhem, and frankly, they have been for 2 decades, killing American servicemen in Iraq, funding groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Ultimately, the United States has much more forces in the region, and it would be devastating for the Iranian regime. I do hope diplomatic negotiations work in the near term, but in the long term, the Iranian regime will continue to be a menace and a destabilizing factor in the Middle East.
Andrew Boyd, I appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
Still to come, Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury intends to keep, quote unquote, naming names in the Epstein files. What about Bill and Hillary Clinton? What's on her mind there, if anything? What other leads is she seeking evidence about? We will ask. Plus, California Attorney General Rob Bonta on Trump's 100% false allegation of widespread and outcome-determinative election cheating. Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that billionaire's tax in California, too. And she's a wellness influencer without an active medical license, and she could be the next Surgeon General. We will look at Casey Means and her Senate confirmation hearing. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. Starting tomorrow, Bill and Hillary Clinton will testify behind closed doors before the House Oversight Committee. They'll do this near their home in Chappaqua, New York. The two have not been accused of any wrongdoing, but the committee is nevertheless looking into their connections to Jeffrey Epstein. New Mexico Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, Democrat on the Oversight Committee, joins me now. Congresswoman, great to have you. What do you have on your mind, if anything, about Bill and Hillary Clinton and Epstein?
Yeah, well, I was one of a small number of Democrats to vote in committee to hold them in contempt. And I want to make clear it's not because of wrongdoing that we've seen in the files, but because they failed to appear for their deposition and then argued that you could not depose and subpoena a former president of the United States. And as we are watching a president that is committing crimes virtually every day, it's really important that our committee maintain its subpoena power and that we preserve Congress's checks and balances on the executive branch. Now, I personally do not plan to attend Hillary Clinton's deposition. There is no evidence that I've seen in the files that she is associated with any kind of wrongdoing around the Epstein case. But certainly we've seen materials in the Epstein files that essentially show that Bill Clinton was still maintaining a friendship or at least a business association with Jeffrey Epstein, and that there were girls who were accusers of Jeffrey Epstein's present during, for example, Bill Clinton's trip with Epstein to Africa with Kevin Spacey. And so we have some hard questions for the former president.
I had Annie Farmer on this program earlier this week, and I asked her about Les Wexner's deposition. And she found some of the answers there astonishing in that he was never interviewed. The person who was as central to anyone in America to the financial beginnings of the Jeffrey Epstein empire. What else did you take away from that Les Wexner deposition?
Well, I believe that Mr. Wexner perjured himself because I went back to the unredacted files on Monday to look at the U.S. Department of Justice's case that they were bringing in 2019. And there is clear correspondence in DOJ's files that says that not only was he being investigated as a co-conspirator, he was subpoenaed and asked to be deposed. So whether or not he personally participated or his lawyers, it's very clear that they interviewed him. And it's in the actual DOJ memos and correspondence about that case. But with respect to his role, it's very clear there would be no Jeffrey Epstein without Les Wexner. He was the man who financed essentially Epstein's billionaire lifestyle, whether that is his homes, his flights, his access to capital, and ultimately what made Epstein wealthy enough to be able to move in the circles that he did.
I'd like to ask you about the ranch in New Mexico. The Attorney General there has opened an investigation. The state legislature, as I understand it, has, on a bipartisan basis, supported that. What do you think can be known and learned?
Yeah, I had as my State of the Union guest yesterday our State House Representative Andrea Romero, who is the co-sponsor of that bill that created a bipartisan truth commission. And I really want to emphasize that this is not a partisan issue. Holding perpetrators accountable who are committing sexual crimes against minors and sex trafficking women should not be a partisan issue. And in New Mexico, we are leading the way. We are the only state in the country to open a truth commission, and we are reopening an investigation that New Mexico had already undertaken into very serious crimes that included both sex trafficking of women and minors into New Mexico to Zorro Ranch. But there's also allegations in the files that became unsealed because of the work Congress is doing that show that there may have been a double homicide of two women who may have been buried at the property. And so that's why the AG has reopened an criminal investigation into the property. But I also want to emphasize that we need the Department of Justice at the federal level to do its job. You know, people are asking Congress, why haven't you prosecuted? Why have you not turned the Epstein files into Epstein trials? That's because the job of doing so is the job of the U.S. Department of Justice. And as we've seen, they've obstructed this investigation for decades. And certainly during the current administration, they're failing to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. They're refusing to release files. And now they're covering up files that implicate the president in a potential crime.
Let me pick up on that last point because there's been reporting this week that there is a certain segment of the files in which there are allegations of abuse of Donald Trump, of a victim that did not appear. Have you reached a conclusion about the validity of those accusations or why they did not appear alongside others that seem to have been similarly placed in the release of documents from the Justice Department?
We do not have a conclusive determination, except for that the Department of Justice is involved in a cover-up and they have refused to release files into the public domain that we know exist. So under a Department of Justice manifest, we see a list of files that includes investigations and interviews that were done by the FBI of Donald Trump's accuser. In fact, there are 4 separate interviews that were never released, and the notes of the FBI after they did those interviews. In addition to that, there is memos that include overviews of law enforcement reports, license report, and there's also a photograph that they suppressed. What we know is that the FBI does not engage in that kind of follow-up and investigation unless they believe there's a credible allegation. The original FBI complaint is available to the public. You can read it for yourself. The lawyer for the young woman called it into the FBI, and it appears in multiple places within the FBI's internal files. So we don't know the credibility overall of these allegations, but I believe we have to believe survivors. And the fact that the FBI investigated and interviewed this young woman 4 separate occasions indicates that something is very wrong here.
New Mexico Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury. Congresswoman, thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
In the State of the Union address last night, President Trump continued to make claims that have been proven to be false, not once, but multiple times, while laying out his case for something called the SAVE Act. That legislation aimed, he says, at preventing widespread election fraud. It is not widespread, but it would require proof of citizenship to vote and implement ID requirements for those casting a ballot. Listen.
I'm asking you to approve the Save America Act. To stop illegal aliens and others who are unpermitted persons from voting in our sacred American elections. The cheating is rampant.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta is here with me now. Mr. Attorney General, respond to that, please.
Thank you, Major, for having me. I'm honored to be here. These are more dangerous lies by the President of the United States. He's lying to the American people. There is not widespread voter fraud. He continues to say wrongly and promote the conspiracy theory that he won the 2020 election. He sent law enforcement agents to seize voting equipment and ballots in Fulton County because he is still trying to relitigate the 2020 election that he lost. And so he owes it to the American people to be truthful. He's not. And the Save America Act is a solution in search of a problem. There is no problem of widespread voter fraud, period, full stop. And the Save America Act will only result in disenfranchising many voters in America.
What does California do to verify voter ID in the registration or casting of ballot process?
We are required to provide an identification when you register. So,
Help America Vote Act has various ways to establish that: driver's license, utility bill, bank statement, and the like.
The Save America Act requires just basically two: a passport, which 140 million Americans don't have, or a birth certificate, and it needs to be presented in person, meaning you need to leave work and go to a government office and wait and spend time. Keep in mind, 69 million women who took the married names don't have a name that matches their birth certificate. 60 million Americans live in rural areas where it's hard to access a government office in person. And again, 140 million don't have passports. So what the Save America Act will really do, which is I think what Trump wants, is disenfranchise voters to help get to an outcome that he wants. He doesn't want to make voting more accessible, easier. The best thing he can do if he wants elections to be safe, secure, reliable, and accessible is do nothing.
Tell me about the billionaire's tax in California. It's going to be on the ballot, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. You've authorized the language to get collect signatures on its behalf.
That's right.
But the governor is completely against it. Governor Gavin Newsom.
He is.
Are you for it?
I haven't taken a position because I write that title and summary. And so it's important for me. I mean, look, I want to get involved in these propositions. It's an important part of our direct democracy in the state of California. I have the duty and obligation to write fair, accurate titles and summary. If I'm also taking positions on these propositions while I'm writing fair, accurate titles and summary, I think that would reduce confidence in my role. So I don't take a position for a reason. It's multiple steps. The step that I've taken is I prepared a title and summary of the language for the proposition that now needs to get signatures. It might get signatures, it might not. If it does get the signatures, then it needs to get on the ballot, and then it'll be on the ballot in November if it gets enough signatures. But the fact that the governor is against it, I think makes it obviously a tougher road.
Talk to me about immigration enforcement in California. There have been federal judges who have described some of the actions undertaken by this administration as straight-up violations of the law. The president has implied on social media after losing before the Supreme Court on tariffs, he's going to lose on birthright citizenship. Help my audience understand where you see this.
First, I'll say the Supreme Court is delivering Trump a series of embarrassing, humiliating losses, and I think more to come. He lost on National Guard. He lost on tariffs. He lost on our Proposition 50, our lawful partisan
in California.
Redistricting. Yep. Birthright citizenship is around the corner. I think he's going to lose on that.
Do you think that's going to be close?
No, it shouldn't be. I mean, I think it really should be 9-0. Will it be? I don't know. But 6-3, between 6-3 and 9-0, I shouldn't be predicting. My staff is probably like very alarmed about what I'm doing right now.
You go right ahead.
but that's my own prediction. ICE has been out of control across this country, including in California. They seem untrained, they escalate, they are unnecessarily violent. Obviously, they killed 2 American citizens in Minnesota. A judge in California issued an order saying that they're racially profiling unlawfully. They are traumatizing and terrorizing Californians, and it cannot continue.
I appreciate the time, and I hope you'll come back.
Honored to be with you.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta. Pleasure, sir. As Russia's war against Ukraine enters its 5th year, a 5th devastating year, Latvia's foreign minister issues a very sharp rebuke of what Russia has achieved or failed to achieve militarily. She joins me next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. This is a jam-packed show, I'm telling you. Next topic, Ukrainian U.S. officials will meet in Geneva tomorrow ahead of a new round of talks with Russian intermediaries. On the 4th anniversary of the war, Latvia's foreign minister, Baiba Braja, joins me now. Madam Foreign Minister, it's great to have you here. I want to read to you something that Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, posted on X this afternoon, saying that he expects the next conversations after what goes on this week will be at the leaders level, meaning he expects to meet face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. And he said, and I think this is the important part, President Trump supports this sequence of steps. This after a phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. What does that mean to you? What does that sound like to you?
That means very clearly that Ukraine is ready for peace, and Ukraine has been ready for peace and very constructively engaging, but it's Russia that is not ready for peace. There is not single indications that Russia would be ready for something like this. So let's see what their response is.
Would Zelensky say that publicly if he didn't think there was at least some prospect of a direct one-on-one with Putin, that maybe President Trump would either attend also or sanction, meaning agree to and say, I think this is a good process?
This is not the first time President Zelensky has said that.
Right.
And President Trump supports it, like we all do. So because there are technical issues that have been solved, there are security guarantee issues that are on the table. The political issues need to be solved at the leaders' level. Ukraine is ready, US is ready, Europe is ready. We need to see what the arrangement is in principle. We haven't seen indication from Russia it's ready.
You were very close to those conversations. You know
we
what
talk
is,
a lot to all the parties involved.
You have a sense of whether momentum is building or not.
Except
you have
Russia.
A sense of it.
Yes, we do. Russia's war is failing. We need more pressure on Russia, more pressure.
What does that
to
look
push
like?
them to the table. Deny income in the budget, so that's oil and gas, which is 40, even more percent in the budget, other resource exports that they have. Deny technology, which is mostly dual use, and that's China enabling it. Deny partnerships, those domains, those jurisdictions that enable evading sanctions, current sanctions. Pretty straightforward, 3 steps from the US, from Europeans, and the rest of the world.
Will Ukraine have to make territorial concessions?
Ukraine is not losing the war. Russia is failing. Russia has not achieved any of strategic objectives on the battlefield. Last year, it lost more soldiers than it was able to recruit. It's losing 35,000 soldiers per month, killed and severely wounded. Russia is not winning. It cannot militarily gain what it wants. So it's trying to push through the negotiations what it can't win on the battlefield. So we have to be realistic that this is not going to happen.
What about the issue of war crimes? You've been very clear about this. Do not let Russia, whenever this ends, off the hook
Absolutely.
in international tribunals for things that have already happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What do you mean by that?
It involves a number of things. I mean, first, there is quite clear registration of Russia's war crimes. With the help of international community and support, Ukraine has been investigating what happened in Bucha. Mass killings, rapes, sexual violence, horrible things, but also in other parts of Ukraine. So there are concrete perpetrators, and it's documented, those whom we know. There are also those who gave the orders, so that's a crime of aggression. That will take a while to finalize, my guess, personal guesses. But then those war crimes and perpetrators have to be brought to the justice system, and they have to be dealt with. Otherwise, it's not going to stop. Those responsibilities are not collective. They are also individual.
Briefly explain to my audience the stakes for Latvia in all this conversation.
So first, our relationship with U.S. it's non-problematic. Our relationship is quite perfect in all aspects: economy, security. We are at 5% on defense already, one of the few NATO allies, and we are investing a lot in defense industry to make sure that we have those capabilities. We have built a fence on the border, so all the border security, mobility, anti-mobility investments on the border come on top of 5%. We are also implementing the sanctions, the EU sanctions against Russia, but also US sanctions on Russia. So one of the few countries who do that. So for us, relationship with the US, the Euro-Atlantic partnership within NATO is non-negotiable. But then on top of that, of course, prosperity is a big thing for us. So we are growing economically. We are number 4 in AI adoption in the world. The ratings were just published, so we're very proud of that. And the US, again, has played a significant role. We got out of, there were limits by the Biden administration imposed on AI chips exports. So the Trump administration lifted those. So we are able to flourish in that respect. Quantum community, I mean, we are doing very well.
Many things.
Leading drone industry within NATO. So there's a lot.
Raja, Madam Foreign Minister, thank you much for being here. I appreciate it.
And it was great to be at the SOTU last night. I really enjoyed that part.
State of the Union. She was out. She got the acronym down. That's great stuff. Madam Foreign Minister, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
She says the president is driving up costs and causing chaos. Virginia's new governor on her State of the Union rebuttal. That and much more next year on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Reporter panel time, stadium version. I'm surrounded. Matt Brown, politics reporter for the Associated Press. Sabrina Rodriguez, political reporter, newly minted Wall Street Journal. And Finn Gomez, our political director. Like I said, stadium style. Take the wide shot, folks, so we can see the whole thing. Come on. There we go. There you go. There you go. All right. It's not an iron rule. It's more an aluminum can rule on this show. But if I tease it going to break, we start with it here. So Abigail Spanberger, Virginia governor, delivered the State of the Union address. I think it was at 4 a.m. Eastern time after Trump finished. Anyway, here's a part of that response for the Democrats.
Is the president working to make life more affordable for you and your family? We all know the answer is no. All
right, I'm going to go in sequence. Matt, Sabrina, Finn, give me your brief assessment of Trump and your brief assessment of Spanberger.
Well, my brief assessment of Trump is that there were a lot of made-for-TV moments, and that reminds you that President Donald Trump entered politics as a reality TV star. I mean, this is a man who had such command of the room at different times. I mean, Republicans were giving standing ovations for everything that he was saying, more or less, and Democrats were took a different strategy this time from ignoring them, from ignoring a lot of his remarks, occasionally booing and shouting at him. And the Democrats, with Spanberger's response, were very to the point and just had an eye for the midterms and what they believe Americans are going to care about, which is affordability.
Sabrina?
I mean, I think we left the State of the Union sort of with the parties dug in the same way. I don't think that you left with Democrats praising Trump for anything he said last night or Republicans praising Democrats for anything they had to say. I think the Democratic response, though, does give us a good tell on what we're going to be seeing as we head to the midterms, which is a similar message to the one we heard Donald Trump saying in 2024, which has your life improved with Biden in office, and now you're hearing, has your life improved with Donald Trump in office?
Finn, it struck me that President Trump was trying to regain momentum and Spanberger was trying to keep momentum that the Democrats are seeing at the grassroots level.
I think absolutely. I mean, what Spanberger essentially demonstrates is that Democratic overperformance that we saw in 2025. Remember, she won by double digits in Virginia. I did speak to some top Democratic operatives, and they said, like, look, I think they thought that she could be on the short list for a vice presidential running mate in 2028. I mean, she has the background. She's a centrist. Spanberger, yeah. I mean, on the Trump side, though, these two stole what I was going to say. Thanks a lot. But I will say, like, I just thought, again, this is Trump, the performative showman. It was a little bit more like Price is Right. But, you know, for the biggest audience that he's going to see until the midterms, to like show, like, this is what I've done. He did what he intended to do. And
folks, the halo effect of American heroism is huge.
Yeah.
And any president who basks in it, and basks in it not once, but multiple times, owns the night. I mean, that's just a fact. There was a Senate confirmation hearing today for Casey Means. She is the president's nominee for Surgeon General. She doesn't have an active medical license, and she is a MAHA health influencer. And here's part of the conversation with the chairman of that committee, Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana.
Do you believe that vaccines, whether individually or collectively, contribute to autism?
Senator Cassidy, You're a physician. I'm a physician. The reality is that we have an autism crisis that's increasing, and this is devastating to many families, and we do not know, as a medical community, what causes autism.
And throughout the confirmation process, Sabrina, she was asked to endorse vaccines. She kept saying, well, they're available. Parents can make choices. This seemed to be a sticking point for Republicans and Democrats.
Absolutely. But I think one of the things that I was thinking of today with the testimony and the conversation around it was that these were some of the similar conversations we were having during RFK Jr.'s, him speaking before Congress, and they wanted assurances from him. And some Republicans are very frustrated because they don't think he's lived out to some of the assurances he gave them. So I think you're seeing some extra skepticism, some extra concerns being aired out in this case because they don't think that they've really seen RFK and they've really seen him as health secretary live up to what he promised.
And Matt, how do you think? Do you think this is a kind of weather vane on the relative strength of MAHA within the Republican Senate conference?
It's interesting, actually. I mean, RFK Jr. just after I was in the chamber last night and saw RFK in Statuary Hall afterwards, and he actually got confronted on this again with the questions of what he believes about autism, what is the administration's policy on the preponderance of autism, and he didn't have many responses for that. This is something that you've seen with the medical, the actual doctors in the administration, including Dr. Mehmet Oz and others, have had contrasting views on this from at times Secretary Kennedy, from at times the nominees who are being put before the Senate. And this is something that the administration has had conflicting messaging on, and that you can see that fight happening sometimes. They're trying to row in the same direction, but it's often the cracks sometimes show.
Finn, to Matt's point, Mehmet Oz was on this program a couple of weeks ago and was unequivocal.
Great interview, by the way.
Stop it. Unequivocal about measles and the vaccine.
Right.
Get it?
Yeah.
Which goes to Matt's point, that there is some tension in the communication and in the actual behind-the-scenes policy.
Look, I think there's obviously a contrast in some, within the administration that we're seeing on this front. I will say that, like, in recent polling numbers, we've seen Donald Trump's approvability slip with suburban voters, right? Suburban moms, suburban families. I don't think this helps him. So I would watch this because I think it could hurt him. Also, by the way, in the chamber last night was such a DC flex. Can I just say that?
DC flex. All right, I'm going to do something I hardly ever do. I'm going to ask you for a prediction. Jasmine Crockett or James Tallarico in the March 3rd primary.
Prediction's the lowest form of journalism. I'm not going to engage, but I will say that this has gotten crazy towards the end. As you've seen, the polls have been going up and down. James Tallarico, Jasmine Crockett. I think that the Texas voters are going to have a case on their hands either way this time next week.
Matt, you get the last word. See, he just completely shut me down. Now that's a DC flex right there. Matt Brown, you get the DC flex for sure. Sabrina Rodriguez, Finn Gomez, always a pleasure. Stadium style. I love it. Happy Wednesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report coming up next.